Chosen by the Library of All Things to receive its gifts, Linh Ly oversees the Red Library, transcribing and documenting information on the Three Kingdoms. Linh Ly's crew is split between the workers of the Red Library, who scour its every nook and cranny, and living stories that represent famous myths, monsters, and heroes. As such, the Red Library keyword allows models to manipulate their own deck, and the well-versed ability lets them look at the top card of their deck and discard it before flipping. Linh Ly uses her control of the Red Library to drop and manipulate scheme markers, while the Keeper of the Red Library ability grants her extra protection while standing near them. Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video I wanted to talk about one of the more recent releases for Malifaux that's come around that I've been having a lot of fun with, like enough to where this core box has kind of made me mostly focus my attention on playing 10 Thunders. So let's go ahead and start off by talking about Linh Ly's core box and then a few boxes that might, maybe even just models that I might want to focus in on her with. This isn't like a complete overview of the entirety of the Red Library and story keyword, but we're really going to be focusing down on her core box and then some of the elements that I really want to mention along with her so that you can then further explore it on your own. Linh Ly's core box comes with her totem, the Jade Rabbit, her henchman Mop Mop, and then for the 3 minions that she brings along, we've got the Bookkeepers. Linh Ly Bibliothecary is the first version of this master. She's living, has the Red Library keyword, and then brings along the ability Librarian that just states when hiring. This model is treated as having the story keyword. There are some models of hers that are Red Library, some that are story, and it comes into play on the back of her card quite a bit. She has defense 5, willpower 6, a move of 5, and she's size 2. She comes along with 10 health. The first ability on her card is Booklight Glow. This states once per activation, after a marker is dropped within 4 inches, this model may have one enemy model within 2 of the dropped marker gain distracted +1. So Linh Ly can really crank out a lot of scheme markers, and it's one of the things that she wants to be doing. But this also can be used if your opponent's trying to slap down something like tide markers, pyre markers, coffin markers, just anything really that is a marker. So she can distract a large amount of things that are kind of close to her bubble. So if you're trying to get to a point of interest on the table and hold it down and make sure that your pieces aren't getting removed, it's going to be difficult for your opponent to really impact that area with distracted being put out so much. It's not limited to once per turn, and it's not limited for models either, so you can just start stacking distracted up each activation. And it's important to note that the marker has to be dropped within 4, and then you can bounce a 2-inch bubble off of that, so you can essentially kind of get this I think it's a little over 7 inches area of messing with your opponent and distracting them, so she can really be safe in an area and make sure that you're not taking a ton of damage. Her ability Keeper of the Red Library kind of plays into that as well. This states reduce all damage this model suffers by 1 for each friendly scheme marker within 4 inches to a maximum of 2. So, or maximum reduction of 2. So you want to have a lot of markers around her, not just for Booklight Glow, but to get this reduction going on as well. And this is not like armor or anything like that, so it's very difficult for your opponent to interact with it. They can try and remove some of your scheme markers, so that's one way to try and guard yourself, is making sure that your opponent doesn't have the ability to easily remove these markers, to try and make it so that Linh Ly's a little bit more she's easier to get rid of at that point, right? So keep your markers safe. She'll be safe since she can use soul stones as a master. She can reduce damage further. So I think that Keeper of the Red Library is a really important part of her kit in making sure that she can survive in the middle of the table and put out the distracted that she wants to. One of the more complex things on Linh Ly's front card is going to be split focus. This states during the start phase, if this model is the crew's leader, up to 2 other friendly Red Library models within 8 inches may gain slow to take a general or attack action. So this one can catch a lot of people off guard because they might look at it at face value and say, oh, well, you're going to give some of your models slow, and that's going to make it a little bit easier for me to kind of maneuver around them. But you do have ways to get rid of slow within this crew, or kind of juggle conditions, and the ability to kind of get the jump on your opponent. Like, this doesn't matter if, or this ability doesn't care if you, the Linh Ly player, are going first or not in the turn. You just get to do this right away. So if your opponent's really like hinging on a model that's on its last legs to try and go first and they're cheating to get that first turn, you're able to kind of interrupt that and get your model to maybe hit them once and maybe try and get them out before they get to activate, or you're using the model to waste your opponent's resources to stop them from losing that piece, or you're getting some markers out or something so you can kind of go off another way, get some distracted out on something with Booklight Glow. Split Focus has so many practical applications, and they aren't always completely evident until you get to see how those turns evolve. So I think Split Focus is probably one of the more like difficult things to envision how it gets utilized within a game, but once you understand it, I think that Split Focus becomes one of the more potent abilities on her card outside of Booklight Glow. Like, those are some of the big selling points for me on her, is this ability to really take advantage of not having first turn or trying to take advantage of the first piece trade and then being able to get distracted everywhere. The final ability on Linh Ly's front card is Well Versed, and this is something that many of the models in her keyword have. This states once per turn, before this model would flip a card, it may look at the top card of its fate deck and discard it. So this is a good way to just make sure that you're not getting duds on the top of your deck. One of the things that I really appreciate about this one is it doesn't stop you from getting rid of jokers. There's a lot of these cards that have this predictive stuff where you can't interact with jokers, but Well Versed can let you pitch that black joker. And I think between Well Versed and everything else that happens within this crew, you're flipping a lot of cards in your deck, so it's quite likely that you're able to get rid of that black joker and never see it in a turn. So I think Well Versed is a strong ability for this crew and just makes it so that your action, or the action you really want to happen, has less of a chance of failing. Transitioning to the back of Linh Ly's card, we see there's only one attack action called Ancient Words. It's a range 8 stat 6 resist against willpower, and the target suffers 2/4/5 damage. It has a Tomes trigger for Draw Out Secrets to drop scheme markers into base contact with the target, and also has the Crow trigger for delay, which causes the target to gain the slow condition. So Ancient Words has a lot of interesting potential. It's got a low min damage, but then a higher damage on the back end with that 4 and 5 on moderate severe. It's not a gun action, so you can ignore friendly fire and kind of shoot, if you will, this attack into your own combat. It's stat 6, which is fairly high, and resist on willpower, so you can get you have the opportunity to like kind of pick off some low health minions or totems with this, and it can maybe give you some pretty good rewards for that 1 AP. Being able to drop a scheme marker off of a tome is cool because you can use Booklight Glow to kind of make something distracted. And of course, Linh Ly's crew really appreciates being able to leverage activation potential by minimizing your opponents through slow. So Ancient Words has its place on Linh Ly's card. It's a really great attack, but it's not something that I end up using very often with her because I find her tactical actions to be much more the selling point of what makes Linh Ly really good in terms of her actions, right? Like, it's a nice, Ancient Words is a nice tool to have in your back pocket, but it's not something that I'm going to be doing multiple times in a turn unless I'm really, really scraping the bottom of the barrel to get rid of a certain piece. Scooting down to her tactical actions, the first one that's listed here I would say is probably, like, in my opinion, her marquee ability. This is one of the things that I really like about her. It's in contention for like her top 2 actions on her card in general, and that's going to be Double Shift. This is a range 8 stat 6 with a TN 12. There's a lot of stipulations here, so we're going to break it down easy. Once per turn, so you can only utilize Double Shift once per turn. You target another friendly red library model, so no story models allowed in this one, and that model has already has to have activated this turn and not been targeted by Double Shift at all this game. So this is a once per game thing per red library model that has already activated. You can't use this on an unactivated model. So there's a lot of checks and balances you have to keep in place with this, and we're not done with the checks and balances yet. Once you end up getting that all straight, the target may activate a second time this turn and also use its Well Versed ability a second time this turn. So now you've got to keep track of that well-versed as well. So it kind of incentivizes you to be a little bit more aggressive with your well-versed ability to make sure that you're able to get maximum use out of kind of burning through your deck and increasing the potential quality of your actions. So the other thing about this action that I'm not 100% certain on how this works, but it's how I've been using it, is that this doesn't kind of like immediately cause the model that you've targeted with double shift to activate right away during the middle of Linlay's activation. Like, she'll finish out her entire activation, and then that model that you've targeted with double shift can go into the regular activation order of the rotation that your opponent's in. So it's not like you can sit there and do something like Ancient Wyrd some big target twice and then do double shift targeting like Sun Wukong and then allow him to come in and then finish up the model. That's really not how I think this is supposed to work. I think it's that they just kind of get put back into the unactivated pool of your models to utilize. So I'd be interested in the comment section if someone has a perspective that's different than that, but I'm pretty sure I'm doing this right. So double shift is really just a strong piece or a strong action on her card. The red library models have some very interesting output potential. Not that they're like a bunch of min 3 beaters that are within this crew, but they have the ability to kind of machine gun a lot of attacks or do really strong attacks. Or not. When I say strong, I mean that they have a high potential for success, and they have some pretty intense abilities on them that you want to make sure that you're broadcasting and doing a lot with. So I think part of the process of mastering like Linlay's potential in the game is understanding how she works with scheme markers, but also really understanding when you need to be using double shift. Like, you should be doing double shift every single turn, even if it's turn 1 and you're doing something like getting a bookkeeper into a further part up the table. You just need to make sure that double shift happens every single time you want it to. And as long as you're making that happen, it's almost like you're having an extra, between 5 and 8 soul stones that you're spending on each turn just in model activations, right? At least that's the way I frame it. So double shift, amazing ability, and I'm interested to see what people think about this one. Next up is Lost Knowledge, and this is one that I rate pretty high for her, another one that I'm trying to do at least once per turn, if not multiple times. And Lost Knowledge has a range of 8, a stat of 6, and a TN of 11, so pretty easy to hit with like a minimum 5, right, to make that 11 happen. You remove target marker and then draw 2 cards. So much like Booklight Glow, this doesn't care what type of marker it is, so I think a lot of times people will be targeting scheme markers with this one because it's just the easy marker to get out there, especially in those early turns when you're kind of like putting out a bunch yourself and just kind of removing them to get these extra cards. But pyre markers, coffin markers, ice pillar markers, all of this stuff they're things that you can remove through Lost Knowledge. Additionally, you can remove your opponent's scheme markers. So you have, like, Linlay has just such a potential to really upset the scheme game that your opponent might be putting or bringing in, or if they happen to be playing a crew that relies on scheme markers to do things. Like, I think that tide markers are another really good example of something you can remove that are going to be all over the place when you play against Clampets, right? But being able to get the benefit of stopping your opponent from having something on the table that they want, and then for your efforts you get to draw 2 cards, there's just so much bonus on Lost Knowledge. And if at the worst case you have to remove one of your own scheme markers, you're not really losing a lot here because the crew has a lot of ways to get scheme markers out that don't really impact like their own resources. So Lost Knowledge is just a phenomenal piece for her. Again, another example of how Linlay's crew can just machine gun through the deck, which I very much value in my approach to the game. Next up, we have A New Cry from a Broken Heart. This is a range 12, stat 7, with a TN of 12. You target a scheme marker, specifically a scheme marker, so we can't do things that like, it's not like Lost Knowledge, right? It has to be scheme marker. You push the target up to 6 inches in any direction. Enemy models moved through this way must each pass a TN 12 willpower duel or gain slow. You also have a ram trigger on this one for healing script that states once per activation, friendly models moved through this way heal 1. So a new Cry from a Broken Heart is ability that I don't think looks really like intense when you first kind of view it, but it has a lot of depth to it. It's a really deep action. I just love it so much. So you can do the range on this is absurd. It's 12 inches, and then you get to push a scheme marker 6 inches additionally. So there's like an 18-inch influence of where you can kind of put this thing, right? So you can utilize this to disrupt your opponent's schemes because you're pushing them away from the place that they want them to be. And if you happen to push them through their own models, like if they're kind of clumped up in that back for an unpack, with this having that 12-inch bubble or that 12-inch range, which is just insane, you're able to try and like just make them flip some extra cards. Maybe you'll get some slow early game or late game, and that's going to be really impactful. But the other cool things about a new Cry from a Broken Heart is that you can put your own scheme markers in a place where you feel like they're going to be safe. If you feel like you've revealed a scheme and you want to make sure that you can, get the scheme marker where it needs to be without your opponent having much influence on that scheme marker, you're able to do that and reposition it with a new Cry from a Broken Heart. And then, the healing is a nice little bonus, I guess, but a new Cry from a Broken Heart can just really set you up or set your opponent back. And I think that's one of the other key strategies of Lin Ly, is being able to understand how she manipulates all the scheme markers and how far or how wide this can go. You can utilize it to force those slow duel or the willpower duels to put slow out if that's your main motivation. You can do it to get your scheme markers into a better place for kind of the to make sure that your schemes aren't so broadcasted or so easily disrupted. And you can do it by disrupting your opponents intensely, because getting 6 inches away from where they're supposed to be, that can really move them out of the position of being able to score and really tilts the point game on Lin Ly's capabilities. The final action on Lin Ly's card is going to be her bonus action, Control of the Red Library. It has a range of 4 and then no stat, resist, or TN or anything. That just happens. This model may take the interact action, even if it's engaged, and when taking the generated action, this model may treat the area within range, as well as any models and markers within range, as being in base contact with this model. So this is a way to try and stop your opponent from reducing the scheme marker output that you have. Lin Ly really does appreciate having scheme markers around her, and if she can just get one for free every turn with Control of the Red Library. Having a free interact action is huge, and making sure that your opponent can't stop it so you can keep that damage reduction going is nice. This is also a good way to make sure that you're generating a lost knowledge marker for free. So you take your interact action, broadcast it out in that 4-inch bubble, and then have your bubble of Booklight Glow to put out Distracted, and then can remove the marker with Lost Knowledge. So you're just doing so much for just a bonus action here. A bonus action can essentially get you 2 free cards that you didn't have before and Distracted on an enemy. So Control of the Red Library is just a way of enabling Lin Ly to do what she wants to keep doing throughout the game here. I think it's a fine bonus action for her, and make sure that you can just turn on all the things that she needs. The next model we're going to talk about from Lin Ly's core box is going to be her totem, the Jade Rabbit. It is an enforcer with the red library and story keywords, so this one can be targeted by double shift if you want to. It has defense 3, willpower 3, movement 6, and is size 1. Notably, its soulstone cost is only 2, so if you were taking Lin Ly as a second master, which I think is not a bad choice, the Jade Rabbit's fairly inexpensive, so it pairs really well with her and brings a lot of great abilities. So I don't play 2 masters often. I think I haven't played a single game with 2 masters since, I don't know, it's been a very long time. So I'm not sure if you can just hire this in and it works the way it works, but I'm fairly certain it works that way. Someone can correct me in the comment section who actually does 2 masters. But the first ability on the front of the card here is going to be Arcane Reservoir. Crews containing 1 or more models with this ability increase their maximum hand size by 1. So for Lin Ly, that's really important. She can run through her deck quickly. This helps you get there just a little bit and just increases your access to resources. So no one would complain about having Arcane Reservoir. It also has the evasive ability, which states reduce all damage this model suffers from shock waves, pulses, and blast effects to 0. It's insignificant, so it can't take the interact action and is ignored for strategies and schemes. Some of that doesn't matter so much. It's also lucky, so enemy models suffer double negative to oppose duels with this model. This helps it keep a little bit more on the safe side, and it's really important when you recognize it only has 3 health boxes. It also has a really interesting ability called Phases of the Mid-Autumn Moon that states at the end of this model's activation, it may discard a card to drop a scheme marker into base contact with itself. This is a good way to get rid of a low-value card and kind of subverts the insignificant part where they can't take interact actions. Lin Ly really enjoys having scheme markers plop down, and this model just enables that at the end of any turn. And with a movement 6, you can get it into a lot of places to make sure certain schemes are going on, and it just doesn't have to really sacrifice anything to make that happen. On the back of the Jade Rabbit's card, we have an attack action that's range 0, stat 3, and resist is against defense. It's called Frantic Flailing, and the target suffers 1/2/3 damage with a crow trigger for blank stare. You can discard a card, the target gains slow, and also must discard a card. I don't think Frantic Flailing is really what you're going to be doing with this model, but it's nice if you want to try and get slow out there. But if the Jade Rabbit is fighting things at range 0, you might be in a very interesting spot. So I don't think it's something you're going to be doing often. Tactical actions. This one's definitely an interesting one for me. It's called Moonlight. This is a range 6, stat 3 with a TN of 10, so you do need a fairly high card to be able to get this to go off. But you target a marker, and until the end phase, enemy models within 2 inches of that marker increase the TN of all of their actions by +2 if any. So again, the theme of like Booklight Glow and Lost Knowledge, it doesn't have to be a scheme marker only. It can be like pyre markers that someone's standing around. I feel like there's some interesting play with this one because I think like a side strategy of Lin Ly is the TN game, and being able to increase TNs is a really big deal for some models, right? They might have TNs on their actions that might seem like they're easy to hit, but that +2 is going to make it a little bit more rough. And when we get over to our next character or our next model to discuss, the TN being raised by 2 can be very impactful. So I think Moonlight is going to be something that you're doing quite frequently. I know that one of the things that I have heard other people have as an interesting pick with this model is to put the upgrade Silent Protector on it, and this gives it hard to kill. So when it has 2 or more health, it can't be reduced below 1 health. And with this thing having Lucky and 3 health, I think that hard to kill makes it so that it sticks around as long as possible, especially if you're trying to lean into the TN game with this one. But just keeping your Arcane Reservoir and drop a scheme marker every turn is really good. It gives it a bonus action, which is neat, because the Jade Rabbit doesn't have one, because I feel like it's kind of the dropping the scheme marker at the end of activation is really kind of its pseudo bonus action. But the attack action challenge has a 8-inch range with a stat of 6 against willpower with a TN of 13, and it just states that until the end phase or when this model's killed, whichever comes first, the target must discard a card to target this model, or to target any model other than this model with an action. And this is just another way to strain your opponent's resources. I don't think people are going to be wanting to attack a hard to kill lucky model. So just having the ability to say that you have to discard cards in order to hit the targets you want is really potent. I think that Silent Protector is a pretty decent upgrade to put on this one. Mop Mop is the supplied henchman in Lin Ly's core box. For 8 soulstones, we get a living henchman with the red library keyword, so this model will function with double shift. We have a defense of 6, willpower 5, movement 5, and size 3 with 8 health boxes. The first ability on the front of its card is Beauty Sleep. At the end of this model's activation, it heals 2 for each model within 4 with slow. Important to note here that this includes Mop Mop themselves and doesn't exclude just doesn't exclude friendly models, so any model with slow. So if Linh Ly has used her split focus ability at the beginning of the start phase, if the Linh Ly player has the top of the turn, then and Mop Mop's taken some damage, you can have him go or have Mop Mop go first, and then heal 4 at the end of its activation. So it's really hard to get Mop Mop to go down in hit points. And if you're worried about people just deciding to ignore Mop Mop and not attack it, then Guardian of Knowledge is going to make sure that you can get extra usage out of Beauty Sleep. Guardian of Knowledge states, when another friendly red library model within 6 suffers damage, it may reduce that damage by 1 to a minimum of 0, and then if it does, this model suffers 1 damage. So I like this ability in conjunction with Linh Ly's Keeper of the Red Library, that she can reduce damage for each scheme marker around her within 2 or up to 2, but can't take it below 0, but Mop Mop allows that to be taken down to 0. And if you're reducing damage by 1 from everyone within 6 inches of Mop Mop, then you're likely to get some mileage out of Beauty Sleep. And this is also, again, tech that isn't ignored by anything that ignores armor or shielded. This is just uninteractable damage reduction, other than, if someone says they have irreducible damage. But Guardian of Knowledge is another great ability on Mop Mop, and a good reason to keep Mop Mop in the middle of your crew. Mop Mop also sports Hard to Wound, so damage flips against this model suffer a negative, and has the well-versed ability that the rest of the crew has, or at least the rest of Red Library and most of Story, I think. I can't remember how many Story models actually have this. Flipping over to the back of Mop Mop's card, the first attack action is Bored to Death. This has a melee range of 1, stat 6, the resist is against willpower, and the target suffers 2/3/4 damage and gains slow. There is a crow trigger on this one for Deja Vu, where you discard a card and draw 2 cards. So continuing with this idea that Linh Ly can get tons of access to resources through cards, having Mop Mop as a henchman and being able to build this Deja Vu suit in with a Soul Stone if you want, makes it so that you're pretty likely to start rifling through cards in your library cards in your deck quite quickly. 2/3/4 damage isn't the greatest damage track in the universe, but it's enough to be dangerous, and making it so that you're putting slow on the opposing model not only enables Beauty Sleep, like this is just something you just automatically can put slow on someone, so enables Beauty Sleep, but also makes it so that Mop Mop's a little bit more durable in the retaliation. So if you can't, for some reason, get the slow off of Mop Mop that Linh Ly has put out through split focus, then maybe it won't be so bad. But stat 6 against willpower means that you're quite well suited to be able to hit most opponents that are coming into you. The next attack we have on Mop Mop's card is a little bit of a meme. It's Take a Look. This is range 6, stat 6, willpower resist with a TN of 13. You push the target up to its move towards a marker in its line of sight, and if the target ends its move in base contact with the marker, this model may have the target either heal 2 or suffer 2 damage. So this is something where you can kind of push your own models around to try and heal them up if you need to. So Mop Mop not only keeps itself alive, but can also enable some healing in some of your other damage dealers that might have gotten away from being able to be saved by Mop Mop's Guardian ability, but then being able to push your opponent's models around, especially out of combat, if you happen to have somebody in your crew who wants to be shooting at them somehow. You can throw them out and then just do 2 damage without really having to flip for that. It's just like reliable damage. Needing a 7 at least to get this to go off is a little hard, but with being a Soulstone user, it's not the worst. And you have, again, so many ways to make sure that these things happen, with either having a lot of access to cards in your hand or using your well-versed ability to get it when you need it. Scooting over to the tactical actions, Mop Mop's first one is Helped by Booklights. This is range 6, stat 6, with a 10 TN, so easy to get off pretty low. You only need a 4 here. Friendly only, you end one condition on the target, and then one enemy model within 3 3 inches of the target must pass a TN12 willpower duel or gain the ended condition with a value of +1, if any. You have a Ram's trigger on here for the target healing 2. So this is one of the ways that you can kind of juggle around slow that gets put out by Lin Lei if you're using split focus. It does have a little bit of like, it could possibly be anti-synergistic with your beauty sleep ability, and that you would be maybe moving the slow condition a bit further out from Mop Mop so they won't be able to heal the 2. But getting the extra activation is worth not having the heal. I mean, like, you'll be able to get to a point where you can understand whether it's more important for Mop Mop to heal or for you to have like a 2-point activation swing with your opponent. But the other important thing about this is that it's easy to hit and ends any condition on the target. And I believe, if I'm understanding properly, because I still am a bit of a student of Malifaux, that if you were like at poison 10 or whatever, you would just get rid of that condition. That's my understanding, at least, as someone who's not looking at the rules right now to confirm it. But Help by Booklights is a really great way to manage conditions and not the most terrible use of Mop Mop's activations. Next up, we have Mop Mop's bonus action as Boring Conversation. This is a 6-inch aura, stat 7, with a target number of 13. Until the end phase, when an enemy model within range declares a non-walk action, it must pass a TN10 willpower duel or the action fails. There is a Tomes trigger on here called Lie Down and Nap. You discard a card, this model gains shielded +3 and ends its activation. So, Boring Conversation you're probably going to be wanting to put off to the end of your activation to make sure that if you happen to land on the Lie Down and Nap trigger, getting shielded +3 is pretty decent for making sure that Mop Mop sticks around longer if you need the extra defense. But this is where the talk about the Jade Rabbit comes back into play, where Moonlight can increase your opponent's TNs if they're within 2 inches of the selected marker by 2. And TN10 willpower duel is like, it's a willpower duel that's annoying when you fail it, but you're not likely to fail it with most things, needing lower cards like 4s and 5s to pass. But when you're looking at increasing that to 12, now you're getting into a point where those are like, that's a real number that you need to hit. And it's not something where you can always be extremely reliant on what's on top of your deck in order to pass it. And with how many, like, it's kind of weird. You might be proliferating slow quite a bit, so you might not have, your opponent might not have many opportunities to have Boring Conversation affect them. But when they are slow and they do fail those, or you're draining cards from their hand in order to make sure they pass these willpower duels to take their very precious actions, it can really put a strain on their resources. So Mop Mop really does kind of support Lin Lei in a phenomenal way, in that we're able to increase our access to resources and decrease our opponent's access to resources. The 3 minions that are included in Lin Lei's core box are bookkeepers. These models are 6 cost, minion 3 living with the red library keyword. They have defense 5, willpower 6, movement 5, size 2, and bring in 6 health boxes. Their abilities start off with Arcane Shield, which states that during the start phase, this model gains shielded +1. They have Don't Mind Me. This model may take the interact action while engaged, or if it has taken the disengage action this activation. It also has inverted steps that allow this model to ignore terrain and vertical distance while moving, and has Narrow Road to the Deep North. At the start of this model's activation, up to 2 other friendly models within 6 inches may push up to 2 inches towards it or a scheme marker in their line of sight. Then they also have the Well-Versed ability that's on all of the other red library models within this core box. So Narrow Road to the Deep North is one of the things that's very interesting about the Bookkeeper. You're able to maybe pull things out of combat that might be there, or just try and get some extra movement for a couple models that are in your crew. This also doesn't have like the keyword bound stipulation to it, and you will have plenty of scheme markers hanging around, so you're able to pull some of those versatile models or out of keyword models that you might bring with you. Also just getting some extra distance on some of your more punchy models, or putting up Mop Mop's auras up a little further is really handy. Inverted Steps allows them to maneuver the board really well, and with Don't Mind Me and Arcane Shield, they don't mind getting into the mix of things because they're still able to do the things that they want to do while they're trying to play the game. To start off the back of the Bookkeeper's card, we have the attack action Paper Cut. This is range 1 melee attack, stat 5 against defense, and then states enemy only, target suffers 1/2/2 damage and must remove an enemy ski marker within 1 inch of it. If it cannot, the target suffers +1 damage. So I think that Paper Cuts is a neat ability in that if you happen to be hunting down some of your opponent's scheme runners with the Bookkeeper, you're able to use their melee attack to try and push some damage on them and take care of the scheme markers that they might be dropping. If they aren't dropping scheme markers or you've already done a good job removing them, being able to go to a 2/3/3 damage for a 6 Soulstone model that can do what this one does, it seems pretty decent. It's not something that I'm always going to be reaching into my pocket for. This isn't their main role to go hunt these models down, but it is something that I can keep in my back pocket if my opponent's really feeling the pressure to get more scheme markers out there, because Linlay might have been removing them pretty efficiently. Next up, we have Cursed Translation. This is range 8, stat 5 against willpower. The target suffers 1 blast, 3 blast, 3 blast damage, and then has the Tomes trigger for Draw Out Secrets that allows you to drop a scheme marker into base contact with the target, and then has the mass trigger of the target suffers +1 damage for each scheme marker within 2 inches of it to a maximum +2. So I think Curse Translation is one of those things where if my bookkeepers aren't going to go do work, I mean like scheme work, this is probably the one that I'll be using more often, kind of keeping them behind Mop and kind of pushing his stuff forward, or his bubble forward, and with Linlay hanging around there as well. You're going to have scheme markers around with Linlay because she's going to want to have that damage reduction, but then being able to change the damage track on this to 3/5/5 blast, or with blast on all of that, means that your opponent's definitely going to be de-incentivized from trying to come into that bubble, but they still need to do something, otherwise they're going to be trying to handle like all of the punchy models that are in the middle there. And I'm not saying that like I feel like Linlay is a bubble crew per se. She likes to kind of have like a small pocket of models that kind of run around with her, but she can function on her own. And it's not like you're going to have your whole crew there that kind of enables this bookkeeper play style. If you're finding a bunch of models huddled around Mop trying to get rid of him because boring conversation gets so annoying, then I think a Curse Translation with the mass trigger is going to be something that's going to service you pretty well. Going to the tactical actions, the first one up here is Bookworm. This can only be done once per turn and just happens. There's no range, no stat, no nothing, no TNs to hit. If 2 or fewer other friendly models have already activated this turn, discard a card and draw 2 cards. Otherwise, look at the top 3 cards of your opposing player's fate deck and place them back in the same order. So, Bookworm is something that I think I'm trying to get to happen every time I activate a bookkeeper, and typically I'll be bringing 2 anyways, so this is where if Split Focus has done some work to where I'm not really worried about my heavy hitter models going early, I can get these 2 Bookworms going and start kind of rifling through my deck and shuffling my hand around to make sure that I've got good resources for the later turns, but also being able to kind of check out what's going on the top of your opponent's fate deck to make sure you can have an educated decision, or you can have a more educated decision on maybe a line of play that might be a little bit risky, or you might be resource low, is also quite valuable. So Bookworm is a really interesting ability, and I think the thing I like about it the most is the flexibility that it has in terms of timing. It's just a really neat ability for bookkeepers to have, to give you a little bit more investment in understanding like measured outcomes or expected returns. The last action on the Bookkeeper's card is their bonus action called Efficiency. This is a stat 5 with a TN of 10, so pretty easy to hit normally, and it just states that this model may take the Interact action, and that's just, it's nice to be able to allow the Bookkeepers to get far up the table and still be able to drop scheme markers. Like, with them having the speed that they do, being able to get them far up and then just bonus action to interact is helpful for trying to get some of those more spread out schemes. So I definitely think between Curse Translation, Bookworm, and Efficiency, you can have Bookkeepers function further out from the rest of your models. Although the Deep Path to the North Road, I think, I'm not looking at the front of the card right now, but that particular ability incentivizes you to have them closer to models. So it's like, it's an interesting balance to figure out where you want your bookkeepers and what you need them to be doing. But it doesn't stop you from still getting a lot of effectiveness out of that ability towards the end of the game as well. So the bookkeepers are just a solid model, and it's really not uncommon for me to take two of these depending on the schemes and strategy that happen to be in front of me. So I wanted to wrap up our discussion on Linlay with just a couple options, either in keyword or some versatiles. And the first one I want to talk about is something that I've been having a lot of fun including in our list, and that's going to be the Shadow Effigy with the Effigy of Fate upgrade on it that then allows it to turn into the Shadow Emissary on turn 3 or later. The Shadow Effigy itself brings some interesting things with being able to give you some concealment, since her crew doesn't really have a lot of great defenses against shooting, unless we're talking about the story of Raijin maybe. But having concealment on top of that doesn't hurt. The big one for the effigy is that during those early parts of the game when you're waiting to transform, you have Remember the Mission that just states that you target a friendly model that has not been targeted by that action this activation, and that target can take the interact action if it's engaged. And if you have a mask to go off on that trigger of get into position, when resolving before the unit takes the interact action, you can push it up to 3 inches in any direction. So this is a nice way to get more scheme markers out or do more things with your interact action in general, and start planning for what your end game is going to look like. You're having extra markers in your backyard to remove for lost knowledge and get that damage reduction. So I think early on the Shadow Effigy is really good for what Linlay is trying to do. And then when it turns into the Shadow Emissary, that's after your opponents kind of come in and started doing work. You have a lot of ways to force TNs on opponents, whether it's going to be the Dragon's Fire or Terrifying or the Lightning Storm Shockwave. So having the Jade Rabbit allows you to increase all of those TNs by 2. So the Shadow Emissary goes from a moderately annoying model to deal with to a very difficult one to deal with Terrifying 13 and throwing out like movement movement 10 or 12 duels at that point. Movement 13 up to 15 with Lightning Strike. Also, it provides her crew with a min 3 beater, which she doesn't have easy access to. So I think that the Shadow Emissary can really help you close out a game when your opponent started to come into you and really has started to wear your crew down a little bit. So I very much like this inclusion with Linlay Bibliothecary. Our first story model we can talk about is going to be the story of Raijin, and without going over the full card here, the big things that the story brings is another durable model that has a way of putting out a lot of TNs and can manipulate the table by pushing your opponent around a little bit. Middle of the Storm is another big one because, as I said, this crew doesn't have a whole lot of inbuilt defenses when it comes to trying to stay away from the ranged game, but when you have Middle of the Storm, any gun action that targets a model within 3 inches is going to be reduced by 2 damage, and then Mop can start taking that down too. So the story of Raijin is a really great pick if you're playing into a crew that has some ranged potential. Outside of that, the story also brings along a lot of other TN or shockwaves that have that can benefit from the Jade Rabbit's increase of TNs with Moonlight. And then Maddening Drums gives you the ability to push markers around, remove enemy markers, and do a bunch of damage for your efforts. Along with having the bonus action of Juggernaut, I think the story of Raijin just provides Linlay with not just a tech piece, but is good overall. Like, if you're not playing against guns, Middle of the Storm being on this card isn't going to bother you any, because there's just so many other great things that this model happens to bring along to her keyword. The final model I'd like to talk about is going to be the Calligrapher for Red Library, and one of the big reasons for my including this one in the discussion right now, outside of it being a keyworded model, is that I think it also brings a lot to Ten Thunders as a faction in general. Like, bringing this in out of keyword for 6 Soulstones is really decent for what it brings, and it is a fairly manipulative model when it comes to being able to survive and get out of or not be able to be engaged unless they're within base to base. But Accomplice allows you to set things up and then knock something down if you want to pitch a card that you should have in ample supply, to make sure that the things that the Calligrapher does can be fully taken advantage of by your other models. The big ability that makes me think that this is going to be included elsewhere is going to be the Rewrite ability. This is range 8, stat 5 against willpower. You cannot target the same model more than once per turn with this ability, but you choose one of the following abilities that's on the target, and that's going to be hard to wound, hard to kill, armor plus X, incorporeal, flight, unimpeded, manipulative, terrifying X, or disguised. And then until the end phase, the chosen ability on the target is ignored, and then this model gains the chosen ability. So it does give the Calligrapher a little bit more of a survivable vibe to it, but for what it's really doing is taking away some of these abilities that's harder for Linh Ly's crew to deal with. So the Calligrapher is enabling Linh Ly and her crew to really take apart models that are meant to be extremely survivable. Like if you're looking at an armor +2 whiskey golem or something like that, and your opponent's rammed it down your throat, all it takes is a quick willpower duel to try and strip that armor away from them and let the rest of your keyword or the rest of your crew kind of take it down a notch. I don't have any reservations with saying that Linh Ly is my favorite master from the Madness of Malifaux book. I think that her first version, Bibliothecary, brings a lot of really interesting lines of play, almost like this. It feels like it's Nelly style on the sticker, but then when you start putting her on the table, there's a lot more complexity to her that allows her to interact with the game in a very different way. She's not leaning so hard into this conceptual winning style that Nelly has. And then when you switch over to Linh Ly's second version, the Storyteller, she ends up bringing a lot more. She completely flips gears and is super punchy and enables her crew to get into position and be punchy as well. I think that I didn't go too deep into Linh Ly Storyteller, but I think that out of all of the masters that have their second version, like all the masters in the game have their second version, but of all the masters in the game, I feel like Linh Ly is in this very elite group where her original version is so different from her second version that you really can bring nothing but Linh Ly to a tournament if you wanted to and have a pretty good go at having most of your matchups covered. There will be some issues, of course, because they don't solve each other's complete problems, but the tools that she has access to within her keyword and the deep toolbox of versatiles that 10 Thunders has to them makes her a really interesting solo master option if you're really wanting to try and learn how to play one master really well in all situations between their two versions. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm kind of knocking off the rust right now with Malifaux stuff, and a lot of it's been done in 10 Thunders right now, mostly with Linh Ly. But let me know in the comment section what kind of things you'd like to hear from the channel next. I mean, whether it's a master or a concept. Like right now, this is really the best way that I know how to, engage the game the way I like to. So I'm always open to suggestions in terms of what people are looking for in YouTube content for Malifaux. So thanks again for sticking around with me, and I look forward to making some more videos in the very near future.